Hello everyone, welcome to Journey to Becoming a Head Coach. As always, my name is Jeff Freeman. I'm here today just to discuss just a quick 4-3 base defense. I've gone over 4-2, I've gone over odd, and then I thought back, I was like, well, wait, I haven't gone over a 4-3. And to be honest, it's kind of where all my defenses have kind of started back from high school days, college days, and even my first legitimate coaching job. We were running a base kind of 4-3 look. So just gonna kind of quickly go over a base look and how that looks against double tight, where it's 22 personnel, 21 personnel, and then kind of how it adapts to a couple of the spread looks and things like that. And there are some adjustments you need to make once you get to some trips and some empty and things like that. But as far as out of this base front look, kind of go over what everything looks like as a base kind of a style. So out of a double tight look, what we would normally do is now we had in what we called an end, an anchor, a nose, and a force. Technically your end and anchors were your strong side players, your nose and your force were your backside players. Your nose was your one tech guy trying to control the center. Your force was your best pass rusher or your speed defensive end. Now, and then your Mike, obviously A gap player, played in a 10 technique. Also, he was your best scraper, and if you had the ability to be able to bring him down into play some Tampa 2 coverage where he would be able to drop into that deep middle, give you kind of a 3 safety look against pass coverages. Work out really nice if you had that type of backer. Weak side or Willie backer, played B gap. He was kind of your best hard-nosed run defender on the backside. And then your Sam backer was an outside player when they had a tight end. Corners were in that cover 2 look. We would try to get them to disguise most of the time, but we would have them, up in the Z or the X's face. Sorry, I have 2 Z's on here. Apologize for that, but just so I can widen them out. But we'd have them up in the face, rerouting and whatnot, and then sinking as long as there was no threat, because we didn't like them covering grass. I can't tell you how many times when we would get guys coming up from the JV level and they would still be out here for some reason. It's like, great, when did ever 4-leaf clover ever catch a pass? So we'd always have them 6x2 if it was a double tight look like this. Now in double tights, and we would have our safeties anywhere between no shallower than 10, no deeper than 12, based on the formation. So kind of that was their basic rule: no shallower than 10, no deeper than 12. So that was their base rule on that. These guys, we try to keep them at about no shallower than 4.5, no deeper. The Mike we could play games with, depending on if he was a really good, fast, athletic Mike. We would allow him to get maybe as deep as 6, but our Will, we'd be like, hey, no shallower than 4, no deeper than 5. So, because again, he was a really hard nose. He was the guy we blitzed the most out of most of the time. So he was up a lot more than he was back. Our Mike needed to be a scraper and a read guy, so he needed to be able to get sideline to sideline, so we would allow him to back off. And then with our Sam backer, kind of same thing. We would play games with him, but we wouldn't let him really get any deeper than 5, because he was reading that tight end. If we needed him to get and set an edge, we wanted him up a little bit closer to the sideline, especially against a front like this. Also with a front like this, we would kind of change our defensive front. We would go what we called a check head look, where we would have everybody pretty much head up, just to kind of allow, basically, it was an even front for the most part as far as a run. You didn't really know where the run strength was going, so we would line these guys head up. Now, and we would play games with that. We would sometimes have them go out, depending on what they liked to do out of this. If they liked to try and run outside, then we would basically scheme it to where all of our defensive linemen would take the outside gap. If they were doing this to try and run inside pressure, then obviously we would pinch it, and we'd pinch all into the inside gaps, and these guys would play cleanup. So we based it on what they liked to do, but generally speaking, we would try to have them 2 gap if we could. Now that was when we really had defensive ends and defensive linemen that could do that. That's when we realized that they were struggling 2 gapping or setting hands and putting pressure. Then we moved to more of the slanting and the pinching and the moving in and out look to try and help negate our lack of ability to 2 gap. So now as things kind of started moving out, let's just start with 21 personnel. Again, base cover 2 looks, so you got your safety covering deep half, your other safety covering deep half, corners covering the flat. Willie's got hook to curl, Sam's got hook to curl, Mike's got middle hole depending on where you try to place him, you can have him try and go back as to a deep middle safety to avoid any of those post routes or seam routes. So, but in any case, then when we would move to this, again, he's the force defender. So, and not only that, he has basically boot counter reverse. He's outside contain and things of that nature. Willie's got B gap. Nose has got the A. Mike has got A, but also he's a scraper. He's a read guy. And then Anchor has the B gap. He had to be our best run defender. He was handling that play side guard. And then our end was in what we would call a 7 technique inside the tight end, and his job was to make sure the tight end did not release down inside to the mic and control that C gap area. If he released outside, his job was the hot hand, the Y, just at least give him a little pop and then reroute, because if he's releasing outside 9 times out of 10, he was trying to arc release or anything like that. If the end got no pressure from the tight end, his job was to just punch him and then sit on that C gap and either prepare for any kind of run or then pass rush depending on what was going on. Because obviously if the Y releases outside, he might be trying to hook him for an outside run. But usually if he's trying to release really quick, he's trying to get out into a route. So our end would just basically have a quick pop to allow our Sam to make the read and adjust to the Y. So that's our base against 21 personnel. And we would play games a lot with our corners. And obviously, we could back them off and make it look like cover 3. We would try to have our free safety play games, walk up and down. Again, disguising was key, because obviously if you just sit in cover 2, there's natural holes in that cover 2. If you're able to get any of those corner routes, if you're able to get any of those post routes, seam routes, and things like that. So there's obvious holes. So we tried to hide those holes by disguising, things of that nature, making it look like cover 3 or cover 2, especially early on, just having the corners move around and having the safeties move around. As far as our front, we would play games with our fronts as well. We had a lot of stunts out of these with these 4 guys. We would run stunts with the inside 2, and we'd run stunts with the outside 2. And sometimes we would do both sides. Again, you know, you have your basic, we would call, obviously we have an A and an N, a nose and an anchor. So we had pick and axe for those 2. So pick, you know, pick your nose goes first, anchor goes second. We had axe for anchor goes first, nose goes second. And then we had text and exit, which text meant tackles went first, ends went second. And we used to do that a lot in the run game, where we would go text and they would go hard outside, and then our ends would loop around and get a lot of things right there at the line of scrimmage, either for a loss or no gain. Then we would have exit, where our ends would go in, pinch hard real fast, and then the nose and the anchor would release outside. That was more a little bit more of a pass rush, because you had your faster defensive lineman really collapsing the outside and trying to collapse the pocket to force the quarterback to move out, and then you had your nose and your anchor getting to the outside to catch him if he tried to escape the pocket. So those were games we played with the front. And then what we really liked to do against some wing T teams playing with the front is we would move the anchor and the nose, and we would play some games we would call it strong and weak. So how that just kind of ended up is, like, for example, we would literally almost cover up every gap, and we would just leave this guard uncovered. We condensed that down against wing T teams, because then what it let us do is we'd either blitz him, because they loved to pull guards, obviously, for their trap and their sweeps. So if he ever got that pull, he was just coming right through that gap and trying to pick it off. It worked really well against wing T teams for the longest time. So again, we would just come down, cover up their entire strong side so they had nowhere to go, and then we would let our will backer read that guard and go. That was some games we played against wing T teams. But as far as premise-wise, and we played a lot of games with, well, you know, moving our line around as far as slanting and angling. We would always have something kind of going on to really get these offensive linemen thinking. So obviously slant S, we would slant strong, have all these guys go one gap over, and usually when we did something like that, we would bring a will off the edge. And then whenever we wanted to go, like, slant was to the strong, angle was away. Now when we had a lot of tight end teams early on, we'd always go slant goes to the tight end, angle goes away from the tight end. But then as we started seeing more and more, obviously 2x2, and you had more spread looks, now you kind of had to either preface that off the back, you had to preface it off of the field, you had to preface off formation. So things kind of changed early on. But in any case, we would slant towards the tight end, we would angle away, and obviously we would bring a Sam if we were going to go away, we would bring a Will if we were going to go two, and then we would have our inside blitz game with our A and our B gap, where we would bring blasts to the inside, or we would bring some X stunts or anything like that. So that was our basic front look against a 21 personnel and the 22 personnel. 22, we would end up getting in a head look. We tried to two gap. If not, we'd either go out or we would pinch. Now, what we see more of lately, and again, we played a lot of cover two and a lot of cover three. And cover three kind of came out of really hard-nosed tight end teams. We'd walk a safety down, make it look more like a 4-4 front. So that's when we really knew that this team was just going to run the ball. They weren't really that much of a pass threat. And if they were a pass threat, they tried to go deep, which is why we could line up in cover three and say, well, fine, you're just not going to beat us deep. So that's how we played a lot of cover two, a lot of cover three for the most part, and then we would sprinkle in some man here and there. But as far as what we see in today's game, and primarily high school, obviously we see a lot more of just a spread look, whether it's offset or anything like that. So what we ended up doing is we ended up calling strength away from the back if they ran zone across. So if they try to run any kind of zone across, we called strength away from the back. And we would have that nose play that A gap, command a double team. We'd have our anchor try to command a double team. And for the longest time, we pretty much said these two guys had the quarterback pretty much no matter what. That was kind of the idea. The inside four were in charge of the tailback. The outside two were in charge of the quarterback. Later on, we ended up doing more of a cross key look where the Willie linebacker was in charge of the quarterback and the Mike linebacker was in charge of the tailback, and these four were in charge of just taking care of the inside zone look on that. If they ran more of a veer look where he was coming hard up, then again we would still call strength to the back. The only difference would be now, and if we had time, and this was the other thing that changed a lot, if we had time, we changed it to where we were able to flip everybody around if we had the ability and time to do that. Later on, especially against some tempo teams, we had to just move the D linemen. So if we were to call that, if they started off in one front, then they would just have to kind of flip based on what we called. So we would try our best if we could flip the linemen we wanted to, because again, we had specific spots for these guys. But as offenses got more faster with tempo, we had to make adjustments, say, no, you can't huddle up, you can't just jump out, you're just going to have to line up and get set. If you have time and we're able to get the strength call out of the gate, then fine. Then go for it and flip, because we know where we want you in certain scenarios. But as things kind of materialized and we would scout teams, obviously we had to make adjustments based on what the team was doing, so then that way we didn't get caught in a wrong position. Now, as far as if we want to try and keep our cover two shell, our free safety would just line up over the number two at about 8 to 10 yards. We would still run that cover two look if we wanted to. If we wanted to stretch it, of course, that's really stretching the middle hole here. So again, depending on your Mike linebacker, if he's able to get there and take some stress off of you, that's great. That's what we try to do, and that's what we try to do a lot of, because in that way we could still have this basic front look if we wanted to. And if our Mike could sink and sit right about here and keep an eye on that Will, that was fantastic, because then we would have that ability to where we could keep an eye on both seams, because now you still have the hook to curl, you still have the flat, and you still have the strong safety. And early on, in my many early days, our corners would stay in the flat. As we realized, we started teaching them, no, if this guy's pushing vertical and he's pushing vertical, you keep sinking until you get any kind of threat in the flat. So if that tailback sits in here and just pass blocks and sits, and for whatever reason, maybe he's running that little post and he's just running a straight seam, then our corner needs to keep sinking and sinking and sinking, because then that's going to help our free safety stay over the top and split these two, because now the quarterback would have to throw over the corner and in front of the safety, and then he would have to move on to the post route. And same technique was taught to the will. If there's getting something pushing vertical, you reroute and sync with it. So then again, if those guys were able to do that, then that caused a huge issue for the quarterback because they'd have to throw over the corners and linebackers, but in front of the safeties. Did it always work? No, of course not. We always had guys that sometimes would reroute, and then they would sit, and they would get beat, and things like that. But again, the premise worked really well when they were able to execute that as far as reroute and go back. Now, I'm not saying that there's probably better coverages you can teach, but we really liked cover 2. We want to stay in cover 2. That was our base, so we want to make sure we could run it against everything. So in that idea, it's like, okay, reroute and drop until the flat is threatened. So in that scenario, if he were to reroute that X and just hit him and let him go up, and then he got this, then he would then stop and come up and help with that W once the pass was thrown. That was the other thing we were having a little bit of trouble with when we first started teaching that. Is like, okay, well, once the flat is threatened, well, once they saw a receiver, they would stop and come up. Well, if they came up too soon, they would be able to complete that pass over the corner in front of the safety. So then we said, okay, no, screw that. We don't want to give up the 10 to 12 yard route. We'll give up the 2 to 5 yard route. So we kept sinking and sinking and sinking. We said, you keep sinking with that deeper route until they throw the ball, and then once he catches it, then you come up, if he were to catch it. So as soon as that ball is released to the flat, then you come up when the flat is threatened. So that's how our cover 2 evolved. Out of everything, we try to just, hey, if you get a pass read, everybody drops. We try to prevent the vertical deep threat, and we want to let them catch all the small stuff, and we'll rally to the small stuff. So that's how we eventually taught our cover 2 against a 2x2 spread look. Now, of course, everything gets stretched, everything gets pulled, everything gets kind of, tweaked out. But then when you get the trips looks, we pretty much, if we try to stay in cover 2, it's very difficult because now you got your Sam way out here splitting the difference. You got your strong safety or free safety over the top of the number 2, and now you're kind of really left alone, depending on how far you want to stretch that free safety over the top with that X. So we would have, depending on what would happen here, we'd have a very huge gap, especially if this was the middle of the field, we'd have a very huge gap. Or if some teams try to formation us into the boundary, and let's just say this is the boundary and this is the wide side of the field, there was a lot of issues where leverage-wise we're like, okay, well, maybe we can't stay in cover 2, maybe we're going to have to make some adjustments to that. Eventually we did, but some things we did to kind of tweak this, especially if this was to the field side, we didn't concern ourselves too much because, again, if you had the Mike backer that could drop, which we had a good amount of the time. So it kind of worked out because he was able to drop and help with the vertical. He was still able to hook with hook. He still had the deep half. So we were still able to help out there. Once we started losing our athletic mics, and that's nothing that you can control. In high school you get the players you get. So then you got to make an adjustment to what your players can do. Well, then we started, okay, well, let's rotate down to a little bit of more of a cover 3 style of look. So that opened up a lot of different things, and we rotated different ways. We rotated, where we, depending on the Sam backer, if our Sam backer was an athlete, we would rotate the opposite way. We bring the strong safety to the middle, and our free safety would be the one to rotate down. It all kind of depended. If our Sam backer wasn't very strong of a pass defender, then we would rotate the safety down. Corner would drop. The corners would drop to about 6 to 8 yards, no deeper than 8. Especially once people started throwing little hitches on us, we would not have them drop any deeper than 8 to start. That's where they would sit. And then again, depending on how good our Sam backer was, so originally it was how good our Mike was, then we started going to, okay, well, how good's our Sam backer? Because if our Sam backer can't handle the pass routes very much, then we need to keep them in the box. As it is, that was our premise from the get, was we want to keep our linebackers in the box as much as we can. We don't want them out in space. But if we had the ability to keep our Sam backer out, then we could rotate the opposite way, or we could rotate down to the side of the strength of the formation. So it kind of depended game to game, and all of that, depending on what our Sam backer could do. So our Sam backer was not very good, obviously we'd apex him back basically to his original spot. We'd apex him between the tackle and here. And then the other kind of little trick we did is normally the end was a C-gap player, but depending on what they liked to do, and I'm sorry, I forgot to cover this, if this was regular doubles, twins, whatever you like to call it, we'd have him apex, and what we'd end up doing, depending on the strength call, is the Sam and the Will, if they had to walk out for whatever reason, they would give a gong call or a viper call, depending on where I was at the time. But if they were out here, if they both ended up having to walk out, they would give a gong call, and then I would tell our ends they would have to pinch. So that doesn't affect this side so much, but it did affect this side a lot, to where our anchor had to play games and sometimes end up going head up, because if he's pinching, we can't have two guys going in the same gap. So sometimes what ended up happening, we'd end up covering all the 4 gaps, we'd end up in a full pinch, not by on purpose, but just by incident, because we wanted our outside backers, since they were already out there was no reason to have 2 guys on the outside. So we'd end up incidentally pinching all of our inside gaps, which obviously helped against zone, because he then had to either bounce it way out, which was fine, bounce it to our Mike and our Sam, or he'd have to cut it back into our Willie and our Mike, or our free safety, depending on if we walked him down. So that was kind of a nice little incidental thing we found out when we started doing that, is it ended up in a nice little pinch, and we cut everything basically on the inside. There was no inside 4 gaps if we had to walk out both backers. If we didn't have to walk out both backers, then again, we still had every gap filled. It was just a little bit of a different way of us getting there. So, worked out really well for us. Now again, kind of rotating back to that cover 3, when we rotate down into trips. Again, we tried to stay in cover 2 as much as we could, but if we had to rotate down, do 2 trips, because that's just what we felt we had to do at the time, then obviously, again, depending on the sandbacker, we would do the same thing. We kind of apex him, which then meant that our end would most likely be pinching, because again, we didn't really have a B gap or a C gap defend. We didn't want to waste 2 guys in the same gap, because there's no tight end there. Technically, the tight end is now removed, so we didn't necessarily want to waste him. And then our strong safety, depending on the spread, depending on the formation setup, we either have them split the 2 or line up over the number 2 receiver. Kind of depended on what they liked to do and how far out they were. So, and then also depending on where they were, also predicated where our free safety was. Now our basic premise was pyramid, the 2 number 1s, so then that way he was directly in between the 2 number 1s to help us out on either side playing that cover 3. So then again, these guys would sink into their deep third. Now, this is a very far route for him to get to the flat, but we would play games with him from time to time, and again, if we wanted to, we could just pinch our F and he could widen out and get out there. And also, if it was the boundary, we could get away with this. If this was more of the field side, then we would play games a little bit, widen him out, and get him out there a little bit faster. It all depended on formation and where we were. And that was kind of the rule of thumb. It's like, hey, if you're in the boundary, try to stay in the box. If we're to the field, get head up, maybe get a little bit outside. If you got to make a gong call, to make the F go inside, so then that way you have the outside and you can get to that flat a little bit quicker, then that's fine. Now again, of course, the same principles were taught. If that X just ran a go route, and it's a pass play, then he's going to sink with that go route until the flat is threatened, and that means he has to get out, ball has to be thrown before he would then come up and help with any kind of run defense on that little arc route, flare route, whatever you want to call it. So that was the base premise of our cover 3, or our cover 2 and our cover 3. We wanted to stay in cover 2 as long as we could, and if we couldn't, then we would move into more of a cover 3. Now, in this day and age, there's a lot more things you can do. We went into a little bit of a 4-2-5 front, played quarter, half. We played some man. We've done all kinds of crazy things. But as far as our very early on beginnings, a great base point for us was the 4-3, cover 2, moving into cover 3. Because again, it allowed us to see the holes of how the game was evolving and where the spread and the inside zone and the read option and everything was coming into. Because again, we ended up morphing from a 4-3 into a 3-4, which then gave us a lot more leeway with 4 backers and 4 DBs to really move into some, some quarter half look. We played with some 3 safety look. We played with all, but we couldn't have gotten there without starting with that 4-3 base and working our way through all the problems and working our way through all finding the holes. Okay, well, how does the 4-3 cover 2 match up against this? How does it match up against that? How does it match up if we have to go cover 3? How does that work? So kind of working our way through that process. The 4-3 was a great base to start with, and in some spots I still think you can use it. It's just very difficult depending on your league, depending on your region. If they're running a lot of spread, the cover 2 just gets stretched, especially if that Mike backer does not have the ability to kind of help you with those seams and those post routes. It's kind of the same thing in doubles. If you're running a lot of cover 3, what does everyone like to run against cover 3 when you got spread? Everyone likes to run, basically 4 verts. Attack the seams and make that free safety make a choice. Especially if it's like a true 4-4 cover 3, then they're going to say, hey, we're going to attack those seams and we're going to get your free safety. If your free safety bails this way, we're going to hit this seam. If your free safety bails that way, we're going to hit that seam. It's the same way in cover 2. We had to find out what the holes were when they started running more spread on us. Not that we didn't know the holes, but as things were changing and adapting, we had to figure out how we could adapt with the spread. Could we run cover 2 against a trips formation? Okay, well, we can't because we're just too far stretched. We could when our Mike backer was able to get, deeper into more of that old school Tampa 2 look. We were able to keep that because now our middle was not as threatened because we had flat, we had deep half, we had hook, we had middle. We were good, and on this side, we still had the deep half with the flat here. And with our corner being taught one of 2 things, like, hey, you sync with that route until it's threatened, then that helped us a lot, give that free safety some more leeway where he could make sure that he had time to get over the top because he knew that corner was going to sync with the vertical route until the flat was threatened. And in a 3x1 set, the only way that flat is really going to get threatened eventually is as he's running that go route, corner route, post route, whatever it may be. It's going to take a while for him to get up into that flat. And again, we were going to let them throw that all day and let our corner and our will and our free safety come up and make the tackle. So it worked for as long as it could work, and we kind of found that really it predicated on our Mike and our Sam. How well could our Mike get to the middle to help with any kind of middle hole complications? And then how well could our Sam play depending on cover 3? Could we widen him out and rotate away from the formation, or was he not a very good defender? We needed to rotate into the formation. So that was that was our base premise, and then again we evolved from there where we started to run some 3 safety and some more quarter half and some 4-2-5 and some 3-4. So again, thank you everybody for the love and support. If you learned something, you like something, again, like, share, send it, all that good stuff. Thank you all very much. I'm going to try and get a few more videos out this week. I know I've been kind of slow on that, getting them out there. It's been like 1 per week. It's been very busy. We ended up going back to school, so kind of been on campus trying to get through that hustle and bustle and all that good stuff. So again, I appreciate your patience. Again, like, share, subscribe, hit a little comment if there's something you want me to really go over even more in depth, or if there's something I haven't gone over that you'd like, my opinion on and trying to go through it. I have no problem doing that as well. So again, thank you so very much. Be great, push limits, hold the line. Have a great spring break, Easter break.